I simulated the entire 2023 Formula 1 season with updated driver transfers, updated cars, updated driver rankings, and so much more. Who will win the 2023 championship according to the Formula 1 game? Stay tuned to find out. My name is Chris, welcome back to CFRacing, and enjoy the video. Hey everybody, what's going on? Chris here, otherwise known as CFRacing, and today everybody, I have one of the biggest videos that I have ever released on my channel for you guys today. And today guys, I simulated the entire 2023 Formula 1 season with a whole bunch of mods, whole bunch of just updated pretty much everything to make the entire 2022 Formula 1 game basically into the 2023 Formula 1 game. But before this video starts, if you guys are new here and you enjoy simulation content, it is not going anywhere weird. I have so much planned for the Formula 1 season, so if you guys want to stick with me, just hit that subscribe button, hit that noti bell, join the Discord, links in the description. We are so close to 1,000 members, and it would be amazing if we can reach that. But I do want to preface this video saying, if you guys can in any possible way support any of the mod creators in the description down below, I highly recommend it. Once again, this video would not be possible without their liveries, the modders who created the entire cheat tool engine, the rating editor engine, any modders who created all the driver suits, all the liveries, all the helmets, everything for today's video. Please, they're all in the description down below. Go check them out. They're all amazing. And once again, this video would not be possible without them. So from the bottom of my heart, please go check them out, and thank you, mod creators. Once again, this video took a long time to make, so if you guys can just hit that like button, that would be greatly appreciated, and comment in the comment section down below who you guys think will be world champion and which team will win the drivers championship. So with that being said, let's take a look at the liveries for this season. Going into the 2023 Formula 1 season after pre-season testing, this is what the running order is looking like. And in last place, we have Williams, quite far off from AlphaTauri, who's in 9th. Then it goes to Aston Martin, and Haas just above Aston Martin. Alpine is quite a ways ahead of Haas, and Alfa Romeo make a big jump up into 5th. Then we got the top 4 of McLaren, who's just sort of in their own right there. Ferrari is in a clear 3rd, with Mercedes in 2nd, and Red Bull very close to Mercedes in 1st. So looking like it could be a Red Bull v Mercedes title fight. Race 1 in Bahrain was won by Max Verstappen, with George Russell in P2 and Charles Leclerc in P3. Sergio Perez rounds off the non-podium sitters, followed by Lando Norris, Lewis Hamilton, Pierre Gasly, Carlos Sainz, Esteban Ocon. Oscar Piastri scores points on debut, George Russell had fastest lap, and Max Verstappen won from pole. In Saudi Arabia, Carlos Sainz takes his 2nd win of his career, with Lewis Hamilton in P2 and George Russell in P3. Great race for Mercedes today. Lando Norris in the McLaren finishes P4, followed by Charles Leclerc P5, Sergio Perez P6, Fernando Alonso P7, Gasly 8th, Ocon 9th, Nico Hülkenberg P10. Nobody got the point for the fastest lap, and Lewis Hamilton actually had pole. It's looking like it's going to be a 3-car title race, which is something we all like to see. In Australia, George Russell takes the win with Lando Norris in P2 and Charles Leclerc rounding out the podium. Lewis Hamilton finishes P4, followed by Sergio Perez, Carlos Sainz, Kevin Magnussen, Pierre Gasly, Esteban Ocon, 3 consecutive P9 finishes for Ocon. That's just points right there. Zhou Guanyu finishes P10, George Russell gets the point for the fastest lap, and Carlos Sainz actually started from pole. The Baku sprint race was won by Max Verstappen with Perez P2, Charles Leclerc P3, Carlos Sainz 4th, Hamilton 5th, Ocon 6th, Gasly 7th, and Lando Norris P8. Race 4 in Baku was won by Max Verstappen with Sergio Perez in P2 and Charles Leclerc P3. Carlos Sainz finishes P4, followed by Lewis Hamilton, Pierre Gasly, Esteban Ocon, George Russell, Kevin Magnussen, Yuki Tsunoda, Max Verstappen had fastest lap, and Carlos Sainz had pole. In Miami, Max Verstappen takes the win with George Russell finishing P2 and Charles Leclerc once again very consistent, rounding out the podium in P3. Lewis Hamilton finishes P4, followed by Carlos Sainz, Sergio Perez, Lando Norris, Pierre Gasly, Oscar Piastri, Nico Hülkenberg finishes P10, George Russell gets another fastest lap point, and Sergio Perez had pole position. Race 6 in Imola was won once again by Max Verstappen. He's racking up a lot of race wins so far this season. Looks like Red Bull starting off the season actually with the best car. Charles Leclerc finishes P2 and Carlos Sainz finishes P3. George Russell finishes P4, followed by Sergio Perez, Lewis Hamilton, Pierre Gasly, Lando Norris, Esteban Ocon, Hülkenberg with another P10 finish, with Charles Leclerc had fastest lap and Charles Leclerc had pole position. Race 7 in Monaco was won by George Russell, followed by Charles Leclerc in P2 and Lando Norris in P3. Look at Norris. He's having a very good season so far. Lewis Hamilton finished P4, followed by Carlos Sainz. Max Verstappen actually finished P6. Sergio Perez P7, Oscar Piastri P8, Pierre Gasly P9, Esteban Ocon P10, Charles Leclerc had fastest lap, and Lando Norris actually finished 3rd after coming in pole. Race 8 in Spain was won by Max Verstappen with Lewis Hamilton P2 and Carlos Sainz P3. There have been a lot of different podium sitters this year, which I absolutely love to see. Lando Norris finishes P4, followed by Leclerc P5, Sergio Perez P6, George Russell P7, Pierre Gasly P8, Kevin Magnussen P9, again Nico Hülkenberg finishes P10, Max Verstappen had fastest lap, and Carlos Sainz started on pole. Race 9 in Canada, I can't believe this, it was actually won by Lando Norris, and he takes his first win of his career in Canada. That's my hometown, or my home country. Charles Leclerc finishes P2 with Carlos Sainz in P3. Lewis Hamilton finishes P4, followed by George Russell, Oscar Piastri, Max Verstappen P7, not a good race for him. P8 for Sergio Perez, also not a good race for him. Kevin Magnussen finishes P9, Bottas P10, Sainz had fastest lap, and Lando Norris had pole position. The sprint race in Austria was won by Max Verstappen with Leclerc P2, Perez P3, Sainz P4, Russell P5, Hamilton P6, Norris P7, and Esteban Ocon P8. The feature race, or the main race in Austria, was once again won by Verstappen with Leclerc P2 and Sergio Perez P3. George Russell finishes P4, followed by Lewis Hamilton, Lando Norris, Esteban Ocon P7, Bottas P8, Piastri P9, Magnussen P10. Verstappen had a fastest lap, and Sergio Perez started on pole. Race 11 in Silverstone was won by Max Verstappen with George Russell in P3, and I don't know why I said it that way, but Lando Norris is in P2. Carlos Sainz finishes P4, followed by Hamilton P5, Charles Leclerc P6, not a very good race for him in Silverstone, Sergio Perez P7, Gasly 8th, Magnussen 9th, Alonso in the Aston Martin finishes P10, with Lando Norris getting fastest lap, and Charles Leclerc starting from pole. Race 12 in Hungary was Charles Leclerc's first win of the year, and it looks like Ferrari might actually have something here as they had a 1-2 finish in Hungary. Maybe they got some good development updates with George Russell in P3 rounding out the podium. Lewis Hamilton finishes P4 with a Perez P5, Piastri P6, Gasly P7, Kevin Magnussen P8, Fernando Alonso P9, Zhou Guanyu P10, Oscar Piastri had fastest lap, and Charles Leclerc won from pole, and Max Verstappen, he did not get a point this race. Not looking good for him right now. Midway through the 2023 season, this is what the pecking order looks like. AlphaTauri has dropped to the worst car on the grid, with Alpine dropping all the way back down to the second worst car. It literally looks like they've done 2 upgrades all season. That is kind of pathetic. Williams is now the third worst car, which is, good for them, good for their development wise. Aston Martin has not really done much. I think they climbed up just a little bit. Alfa Romeo has dropped down 1 spot. Haas somehow have the 5th best car on the grid, which is kind of crazy. Ferrari and McLaren are 3rd and 4th, and they are very close to each other, with Red Bull and Mercedes being the top 2, and it looks like Mercedes now has passed Red Bull for the best car on the grid. Race 13, the sprint race in Spa was won by Max Verstappen, with Sergio Perez P2, Charles Leclerc P3, Hamilton P4, Carlos Sainz P5, Esteban Ocon P6, George Russell P7, and Lando Norris P8. Main race in Spa was won by Max Verstappen, with Carlos Sainz P2, Lewis Hamilton P3, and Charles Leclerc in P4. George Russell finishes P5, followed by Pierre Gasly, Esteban Ocon, Yuki Tsunoda, Nico Hülkenberg, Oscar Piastri finishes P10, Charles Leclerc had the fastest lap, and Sergio Perez had the pole position. Race 14 in the Netherlands was won by Max Verstappen, with Carlos Sainz P2, Sergio Perez P3, Lewis Hamilton P4, Charles Leclerc P5, George Russell P6, Lando Norris P7, Oscar Piastri finishes P8, Fernando Alonso getting more and more points in P9, Gasly 10th, Sainz had fastest lap and had pole position. Race 15 in Monza was another win by Max Verstappen. He's coming on very strong in this part of the season, with Charles Leclerc in P2 and Sergio Perez P3. Carlos Sainz finishes P4, with Lewis Hamilton P5, Lando Norris P6, Pierre Gasly P7, Esteban Ocon P8, George Russell P9, Oscar Piastri P10, Perez had fastest lap, and Max Verstappen won from pole. Race 16 in Singapore was won by Charles Leclerc, with Lewis Hamilton P2, George Russell P3, and Max Verstappen P4. I would love to see this race, by the way. Sergio Perez finishes P5, with Carlos Sainz P6, Pierre Gasly P7, Esteban Ocon P8, Oscar Piastri P9, and Aston Martin looks like they're having some good upgrades, because Alonso keeps finishing in the bottom end of the points here. He's P10. Nobody had fastest lap, and Lando Norris actually started on pole, but he DNF'd. Race 17 in Japan was won by Max Verstappen, with Charles Leclerc P2, Carlos Sainz P3, and Perez P4. Pierre Gasly actually finished 5th, good result for him, with George Russell P6, Norris P7, Oscar Piastri P8, Hamilton P9, Ocon P10, Leclerc had fastest lap, and Perez actually started from pole. The sprint race in Qatar was won by Verstappen, with Leclerc P2, Perez P3, Russell P4, Ocon P5, Norris P6, Gasly P7, Piastri P8. And the main race in Qatar was once again won by Verstappen. He has a lot of wins this year, with Charles Leclerc P2, Perez P3, Carlos Sainz P4, Hamilton P5, Gasly P6, Esteban Ocon P7, Lando Norris P8, Nico Hülkenberg P9, Valtteri Bottas P10, Charles Leclerc had fastest lap, and Lewis Hamilton had pole position. The sprint race in Circuit of the Americas was won by Max Verstappen, with Carlos Sainz P2, Charles Leclerc P3, George Russell P4, Lewis Hamilton P5, Sergio Perez P6, Pierre Gasly P7, and Bottas P8. The main race in Circuit of the Americas was won by Charles Leclerc, with George Russell P2, Carlos Sainz P3, Sergio Perez P4, Pierre Gasly P5, Lando Norris P6, Piastri P7, Kevin Magnussen P8, Bottas P9, Zhou Guanyu P10, Russell had fastest lap, Sainz had pole position, and Max Verstappen DNF. Race 20 in Mexico was won by Charles Leclerc, with Carlos Sainz in P2 and Sergio Perez P3. Lando Norris finishes P4, followed by George Russell, Lewis Hamilton, Esteban Ocon, Nick De Vries getting his first points of the season, Nico Hülkenberg P9, Kevin Magnussen P10, Sergio Perez had fastest lap, Max Verstappen had pole, but also once again in back-to-back races, did not finish. Race 21 in Brazil was won by Max Verstappen, with Perez P2, Leclerc P3, Lando Norris P4, Carlos Sainz P5, Lewis Hamilton P6, George Russell P7, and Oscar Piastri P8. The Brazil main race was won by Charles Leclerc with Carlos Sainz in P2 and Max Verstappen in P3. George Russell finishes P4, followed by Sergio Perez, Lewis Hamilton, Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, Pierre Gasly, Esteban Ocon finishes P10, Charles Leclerc had fastest lap, and Max Verstappen had pole position. Race 22 in Las Vegas was won by Max Verstappen with Sergio Perez P2, Carlos Sainz P3, and Charles Leclerc P4. George Russell finishes P5, followed by Lewis Hamilton, Esteban Ocon, Lando Norris, Pierre Gasly, Nico Hülkenberg, Charles Leclerc had fastest lap, and Sergio Perez had pole position. And heading into the title decider, there's really only 2 drivers who could win the championship, and coming out on top, Charles Leclerc wins in Abu Dhabi and takes his first World Drivers' Championship. You'll see the points later, but this is crazy. Max Verstappen finishes P2, George Russell finishes P3, Lando Norris P4, Sergio Perez P5, Carlos Sainz P6, Oscar Piastri P7, Lewis Hamilton P8, Pierre Gasly P9, Esteban Ocon P10, Charles Leclerc had fastest lap, and Sergio Perez had pole position. Now guys, you're not going to believe this. Let's take a look at the final stats. And at the end of the season, I can't believe this was this close, and I hope this happens in real life. Charles Leclerc wins his first ever World Drivers' Championship. It's something you absolutely love to see. Obviously, we saw Verstappen DNF so many times this year, but hey, that's how the cookie crumbles. Leclerc has 438 points to finish first, with Verstappen's 437 to finish second. That's crazy. Carlos Sainz had a good year, finishing third, with George Russell fourth, and Sergio Perez in fifth. Lewis Hamilton had quite a rough season, almost literally 50 points behind George Russell. Not a good season for him. With Lando Norris in 7th, Pierre Gasly in 8th, Esteban Ocon in 9th, and Oscar Piastri rounds out your top 10. A pretty good rookie season from him. In P11, we have Kevin Magnussen having a pretty solid season for Haas, scoring 24 points, with Fernando Alonso scoring 12 points for the Aston Martin. Nico Hülkenberg scores 11 points for Haas to finish 13th. Valtteri Bottas is in 14th, with Yuki Tsunoda 15th, Nick De Vries 16th, and the last point scorer is Zhou Guanyu in 17th with 3 points. In P18, we have Alexander Albon, P19 was Lance Stroll, and P20 was Logan Sargent. Tough season for all 3 of those guys. Williams didn't score points at all, but who knows? Yeah, but tough season for all those guys. Williams scored no points, but then again, I didn't really expect them to. But now, guys, let's take a look at the constructor standings. At the end of the year, this is the first time since 2008 Ferrari win a Constructors' Championship. They also won a Drivers' Championship from the first time since like 2007. Red Bull finished P2 with Mercedes in P3. Those 3 teams were quite clear of the rest. McLaren finished P4 with Alpine P5, Haas P6, Aston Martin finished P7, Alfa Romeo P8, AlphaTauri P9, and Williams in dead last. So guys, that is going to wrap it up for today's video. If you guys did enjoy and you want to see more simulations just like this, hit that like button, subscribe, share with your friends, join my Discord, links in the description. Once again, also go check out all the mod creators. This video would not be possible without them. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.